Kathleen, I've heard the term modern contact used quite a number of times, even in your book. Is there a difference between contact today and contact, say, 20 years ago?
There absolutely is. And I would go back more than 20 years, actually. I'd go back, 30 to 40 years maybe, uh, when we first became aware that thousands of, if not millions of people are being taken. The old type of contact was occurring when people were outside. They were either driving or fishing, hiking, camping, participating in some kind of activity when they were outside their home. They had a close encounter with a craft. They usually saw non-human entities on the craft or near the craft, and then they were taken to the craft. And so oftentimes there was a great deal of evidence. There might have been witnesses, there might have been radar evidence, might have been um, clothing that could be analyzed and that sort of thing. The difference today is those initial people who were taken years and years ago were the beginning of all of this. If they had the characteristics that these non-human entities were looking for, they then took this person throughout their lifetime, and they then took their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, so on and so forth, from the time that they were tiny youngsters. According to our research, the majority of experiencers were taken when they were less than 20 years old, and about 37% when they were less than 5, as far as they remember.
Kathleen, the the terms used for people who experience um, these things. Is there a difference between terms such as abductee, contactee, and experiencer? If there is, what is it? Do they all mean the same thing?
Well, what I can tell you is that abductees and contactees are all experiencers. The abductee group was identified in the most recent study that the Mutual UFO Network did on 516 experiencers, and that is after we eliminated those that we identified as hoaxers. We had some built-in questions and ways to identify those who wanted to throw off our results.
Mhm.
But Dr. Don C. Donderi, a retired psychology professor from McGill University and statistician who spent his lifetime doing social research, um, participated in this Mufon project as well, and I did as well. And what we were able to do is to use a psychological measure to identify those individuals who had UFO abduction syndrome. This was a test that was developed over a number of years that Dr. Donderi standardized. And so he administered this, and we identified those with UFO abduction syndrome. It doesn't mean that they had horrible experiences. It means that they had certain knowledge and characteristics. Um, on the other side, when we think historically about contactees, and we still do have contactees, those involve the individuals who are having very friendly contact. They might be doing CE5 experiences to experiments to call in um, these non-human entities. The entities might enter into their environment as the result of a request. They might be channeling this. They might be communicating via telepathy in a deep meditative state. There are many ways to fall into the contactee category, but we think of that as being something good. We know that back in the early 1950s, those contactees who were communicating, they said, with benevolent space brothers, were called contactees. And many researchers today have been trying to call everyone a contactee. I object to that. I believe that a person who has been abducted has the right to call themselves an abductee. And also, a contactee is certainly not an abductee. So this is why I think it's extremely important that if we're going to use a generic term, we need to use the term that Dr. John Mack, the brilliant psychiatrist from Harvard University, who spent the later years of his life researching this phenomenon, he used the term experiencer, and I think that it's a very good term.
Okay. You mentioned the terms benevolent and malevolent aliens.
Yes.
Um, so does that put people, you know, in danger when, you know, they come across a malevolent alien? I mean, what's the objective of the bad aliens? And if there is one, is there also friction between the bad and the good aliens? I mean, do they go to war over this without us knowing?
Well, I think we have to define good and bad aliens because some are more benevolent than others. We know that from our studies that most individuals have come into contact with sort of business-like non-human entities. They have a job to do, they do that job, and sometimes they might be kind to the individual. Sometimes the person is very frightened. And I think that we have to understand that human emotions color the outcome of our experience. So if we're extremely frightened and we can't remember what happened, but we think that it had to have been something horrifying, then we're going to think of those non-humans as being malevolent. There is one group that most individuals consider to be malevolent, and those are a kind of alligator looking draconian reptilian who shapeshift. Now that gives us a clue. Shape-shifting. They might be in the category of what we think of is highly negative astral entities, not extraterrestrials, but these entities who live in a different vibrational state, maybe at a lower level than we humans, but who can transcend the dimensions and come into the human environment from time to time to attempt to attach to vulnerable humans, to feed off this fear, feed off this negativity, and grow. So I did devote a chapter in Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, to this phenomenon, with a lot of information about what it is, how it can happen, and how you can stop it.
That's a fascinating subject too. I'd love to get back with you at some stage and just do an entire segment on that. Another question I had, do people often get contact with aliens confused, say, with paranormal phenomena?
Yes, absolutely. There is a paranormal overlay. So we have to assist individuals in collecting their evidence, having it all documented so that they can determine, and we can help them, exactly what is occurring in their lives. Because as I said before, there are malevolent interdimensionals. There are also highly positive interdimensionals we think of as angels who will come and assist people who are in a very bad way. So, but there is also an overlap of the kind of paranormal phenomena that happens in people's homes. Among the people who experience contact, who have taken part in our study, these 516, 60% have stated that they had the feeling that something unseen was walking on their bed. It had weight, but it did not have substance. They couldn't feel it when they'd reach out for it, but they could sense the weight of it. Also, a very high percentage all had seen these lighted orbs that seemed to have intelligence that came into their homes and interacted with them. Sometimes they expanded into the full bodies of these gray entities. So, again, lots of questions, but we at least have some scientific evidence that this is occurring. Uh, there are other things occurring at a lower rate, such as poltergeist activity. We know that happens time and time again in paranormal experiences. Light orbs happen in paranormal experiences too, in people's homes. So you have to separate that out. Who is inside that orb? What consciousness is in there? And also, you know, well, I mentioned poltergeist, things flying off shelves, doors opening and closing. That's at a much lower rate among the people who believe they're having extraterrestrial encounters, but it is quite common in paranormal experience homes.
All right, we've got a few minutes left, Kathleen. I just wanted to ask you, the fact that we mentioned earlier, you're the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, probably the most famous abduction case in history, I guess, along with Travis Walton's case. That happened back in 1961. Now, if that didn't occur, would your life have been different?
My life would have been very, very different. I started out in psychiatric social work, and it was all because of my interest in this phenomenon. And then I ended up doing graduate work in education and working in that field for a number of years. But 30 years ago, I decided to leave that field. I'd become ill. That was one of the reasons. But I uh, had met all of the original researchers in Betty's and Barney's case. I knew the vast amount of physical and circumstantial evidence. I spent 15 years uh, doing an extensive investigation of my aunt and uncle's experience. And because I wanted all of the answers, I wanted to study all of the possibilities of possibly prosaic explanations for this. In the end, I could come to only one conclusion, and that is that it was a real event. And certainly, if I had never had that happen in my own family, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm. It's almost as if your path has been chosen for you.
Yes, in a sense.
Well, with so much evidence today in all stages of alien contact, I guess 1 through to the ones we know, 5, and so many witnesses, why do you think the skeptics are still refusing to give it any credibility?
Well, the skeptics are probably reading the disinformation that has been disseminated by government disinformants, and believes that because even though many of these people were not real scientists, they claim to have a scientific point of view on this. What they have actually done is they have built a false scenario with false information to cover over the actual evidence, information, and story. This has happened in the Hill case, and this is part of the reason why I try to set the record straight and show the evidence, especially when I speak at conferences, what exactly happened to the Hills and what is the evidence for that. But there are so many people who don't really know the true story, don't know what the evidence was because of the disinformation.
Hmm. And a lot of the times, the arguments that they bring forward, they provide no basis for. There's no evidence on their part.
Yes, absolutely true. It's all speculation.
In your research, as we wind up, is there one experience, a case that you've been involved with that stands out amongst all the others?
Uh,
There's
does
probably
that include the Hill case? In my
well,
mind,
I guess the Hill case aside, and obviously the Travis Walton, which has been well documented, but the ones that you've researched.
well, I did a pretty thorough journalistic investigation of the uh, Tom Reed and Matthew Reed abduction case that started in central Massachusetts when they were boys. Their mother had been taken from the Allagash in Maine when she was 16 years old. And it is generational contact. I know Tom, I've interviewed him many, many times. I did not do the investigation of the actual physical evidence, but the Mutual UFO Network did. Tom Reed took a lie detector test and passed it with no evidence of attempting to fool the polygraph examiner. He passed it with flying colors. It's a very compelling case, and it's one that the Mutual UFO Network has endorsed and I have endorsed. Another one is the case of Ed and Denise Stoner. And I have personally investigated that case over many years. I've done the hypnosis with Denise and with Ed. I have examined physical evidence in this case, and these contacts have repeated time and time again. So we were able to acquire physical evidence along the way. So to me, that's a very compelling case that Denise and I wrote about in the Alien Abduction Files, one of my 5 books as well. And gosh, there are many compelling cases, I must say. I wrote about 2 of those in Extraterrestrial Contact that I think that readers will be very, very interested in. One happened at an airport in the Southwest, and one happened in Winnipeg, and both very compelling evidence cases.